A few years ago, I made this video, where I covered Nagisa's backstory in detail. One of the most interesting parts of her story was the character Yu. Despite being a faceless, non-playable character, her sprite was given some very standout details, and her character had a lot of unique personal traits that made her feel so much more fleshed out than usual. Well, shortly after this video dropped, I started getting comments telling me that Yu had become a fully realized character in Magia Record, one of the last 2 new characters introduced before the app shut down. It's finally time to go back and finish off dissecting Yu as a character. Not only that, but the companion girl she dropped with, She. And while I'm talking about some dubious girls, I figure I might as well cover Magia Record's villains proper as well. It's all baddies this time. Let's discuss the hidden details behind these magical girls. It makes sense to cover these two at the same time, and you'll see why as we get into it. Not only are they teamed up together, but they share a very unique similarity with each other. When they transform, their appearances change really dramatically. Usually when the girls transform, their eyes and hair stays the same color and style, but Yu and She's hair becomes something completely different. It gives the two a sort of otherworldly feeling, like they don't really belong in this magical world. Now, since it's been a while, let me give you a refresher on what we already know about Yu. When Nagisa meets her, Yu explains that she has a list of bad people who she goes out to kill. She harvests their organs and disposes of their bodies in the witch's labyrinths. One of my biggest questions about this whole deal now has an answer. Where does Yu get her list of bad people from? This is where She comes in. She is an incredibly unique case because she's been affected by Kyubei's contracts twice. The first time was given by her mother. While pregnant with her, She's mother made a contract with Kyubei. There was a witch attacking the hospital she was in at the time, so she made the contract to protect herself, wishing that her daughter would know the pain and suffering of others. Presumably wanting to wish her child would be empathetic, but in classic Kyubei fashion, her wish came out a bit more literally. She was born with the magical ability to feel others' pains in her dreams. When she goes to sleep, all she feels is the pain from people nearby. Physical, mental, emotional, what have you. She keeps a dream journal detailing who's hurting people and how, and Yu uses this dream journal to make her list of bad people she goes out hunting. Yu wants to kill them so she can get a good night's sleep. Eventually though, She also makes a contract with Kyubei, wishing to not only feel people's pain, but also their hopes and wishes, giving her full access to the full spectrum of emotion. This duality seems reflected in her design as well. The 2 different empty faces on her shoulders, masks that hide her own emotions because she's overwhelmed with everyone else's, her 2 different sets of arms that feel reminiscent of this concept of duality, but also gives me the impression of her being hands-off. The extra set of new hands she gets is the ones that wielding her weapons, dual pickaxes. Perhaps a leftover from that pained wish her mother cursed her with, so her true set of hands, the ones that she made with her own wish for hope, never actually engage in combat. The 2 pickaxes is the element that stumped me the most. Her artwork depicts her digging them into herself, seemingly, hurting herself as she feels others' pains she causes, it seems. When I think of pickaxes, I think about digging, mining, and whatnot. I get the idea of them digging into her, but I feel like they wanted to use a scythe, but then they realized a ton of girls already use scythes and opted for something a bit more unique. The marks on her legs remind me of cut marks. Sometimes people will cut themselves on their legs because it's easier to hide than on their arms. And it also matches her doppel, keloid. A keloid is a type of scar. It sort of bubbles up and is made out of collagen. It also tends to hurt and causes aching or itching. Again, leaning into She's themes of feeling pain. These cut marks on her legs seem to allude to that idea, and the same is true for these marks on the hands of her doppel form. The large balloon-like part on her back might also be referencing that, but I'm not super sure about that detail. However, the halo of thorns still pushes into that idea that she feels continual pain. Now, this has been a lot for She, but I think it's time to bounce back over to Yu again. We know where she gets her list, but what else is going on with her? Well, in order to explain it all, let's start with her backstory. Yu used to have a friend named Kei. Both were loners and struggled mentally. They'd even practiced strangling each other. Eventually, they decided to commit suicide together. They tied themselves together with a ribbon and threw themselves into the ocean. Unfortunately, the ribbon didn't stay tied as they got separated. Yu was pushed towards the shore and was rushed to a hospital. She survived. Kei did not. Distraught by these turn of events, Yu made the contract with Kyubei, wishing to lose her sanity to the point where she couldn't remember who she even is. Wiping away the memories of her friend, Yu became a magical girl. Ironically, her magical ability is sort of different. Kyubei seems to have leaned into the cause for her making the wish, rather than the outcome when giving her the ability she has. Yu can make people relive their most traumatic experiences. A walking nightmare, and we haven't even gotten to the horse stuff yet. So yeah, clearly her design has a unicorn theme to it. Her doppel, Morphine, especially hammers home this idea. It might be a nightmare, like I said, but there's other unicorn symbolism at play here. The Magia Record wiki speculates the horn paired with the round neck piece thing is meant to look like a sundial. However, I'm not too sure about that. Instead, I think it looks more like a timer. Like when you see her, you're running out of time, right? From behind though, it also sort of looks like a bag, like maybe like a body bag, not only to hold her victim's organs, but also to represent how she wanted to die. Unicorns are also associated with healing. Specifically, it's said to heal poisons or toxins in classic lore. Her wishing away her sanity might be her way of seeing her healing herself. Also, she might think killing the bad people she writes about is healing her. Also, this one might be a bit of a stretch, but this all happened because Yu threw herself into the ocean, and in The Last Unicorn, the unicorns were trapped in the ocean. This might just be a coincidence, but I still think it would be neat. So, there's one last thing about Yu's unicorn design that's really important and also is the biggest reason why I wanted to talk about both of the two girls at the same time. The two girls' stories are just shrouded in death and despair. With that in mind, and seeing Yu's horse design and Shi's pale, sickly form, the two girls seem to come together to represent the fourth horseman of the apocalypse, a pale rider on a horse named Death. This blew my mind. It works so perfectly too. A bittersweet pair to represent the end of Magia Record's app too. I immediately went into theory mode trying to think about if there would be any other girls who could represent the other three horsemen of the apocalypse. I know one of them is red and brings war. Kyoko's witch form is a red warhorse, but no, that's a theory for another time. I still have 4 more girls I need to cover, so let's take a look at Magia Record's villains. Yes, the 3 little girls behind all the chaos Iraha experiences in Magia Record. I think it's only fair to lump them all together in a group because a lot of the important themes about their characters are tied together. They did all make their wishes as a unit after all. How the story goes, these 3 are all hospital-bound and seemingly close to death's door, Ui especially. Iraha makes her contract with Kyubei to reverse Ui's declining health, so she seemingly makes a miraculous recovery. However, the girls notice Iraha is much more absent now, and they find out it's because she's too busy fighting witches. And then they do the smartest thing any character has done in the whole series.
You promise to tell us the truth? Of course I will. I don't lie.
For once, they actually take their time to really grill Kyubei about how magical girls and witches work. That was always the twist with Kyubei from the original. He would have told you about all that stuff, except you never asked. The girls learn everything they need to plan out the ultimate wish, how to make the witches go away forever and save all the magical girls.
We want your power, Kyubei!
Now, if you don't know anything about these girls, you might be a bit taken aback. Seriously? These 3 little children are the ones behind it all? They're the ones smart enough to come up with such a grand plan? How? Well, it's simple. They're all geniuses. Let's start with Toka.
I wish for the power to transform! charm!
So, a bit of a backstory on Toka. She is a genius when it comes to astrophysics, which if you've watched one of my prior videos going over Iraha and Yachio's designs, you might register this as another reference to the Galactic Railroad. Anyways, because of her understanding of people's behavior and the wording of her wish, she's the reason doppels were created. Looking at her outfit and weapon, you might not get her reference right away. To be fair, I don't think this is really as much of a thing in the West. So, Toka, Nemu, and later when we get to her, Alina, all share a prison theme. Toka here is meant to represent the person who owns the prison. Opulent and almost royal-like, I guess. I'll be honest, I did a bit of Googling, and I don't think Japan has a lot of privately owned prisons. Whatever. Anyways, I think the reason she's in this role is actually related to her father. Her dad is a doctor at the hospital the girls were stuck in, so in a way of looking at things, you could see him as the one in charge or owner of their own personal prison. The hospital. This factoid about her father is also referenced in her doppel's form, Penne Noldi, which I'm not certain I pronounced it right. Clearly, the face of her doppel is meant to look similar of a plague doctor's mask. Before we understood how airborne illnesses worked, doctors would wear these beak-like masks and fill them with nice-smelling herbs and stuff. Because they thought the niceness of the smell was important to keep out the disease. Toka's dad was a doctor, and Toka herself was clearly sick, so this theme works together. Though, admittedly, the details of what the illness was that kept her trapped in the hospital was never specified. Another thing, her doppel is called the Match Seller. Look, you can even see the matches on her back there. But why though? That seems so specific, right? Well, there is a story called The Little Matchstick Girl. That's a sad story about a sad little girl dying, which, you know, is kinda up Puella Magi's alley. But no, I don't think this is referencing that. I'll come back to this Matchstick Girl thing in a bit, so just put a pin in it for now, and let's shift focus to Nemu.
I wish for the power to manifest!
Nemu's genius was in writing. She had published her stories online and was basically famous for her work. She also used her love of storytelling to dream up rumors to spread around the town. It was originally a way for the girls to entertain themselves, but after making her wish, she literally turned their rumors into reality. Thus, the Uwasa are born. Nemu's prison gimmick is a bit easier to spot. She's the friggin' prisoner?
So I'm very happy to take the role of victim.
Okay. Like, she literally has a ball and chain. It's not in the anime, though. I do appreciate how the majority of her outfit is actually themed around the genius concept, giving her the little graduation cap and everything. I'm glad her magical design is pretty easy to grasp, because I'ma be real, her doppel is very, very confusing to me. This is like a lot, and I'm not sure why. I'll start with what I do know. Clearly, Nemu and Toka's doppels heavily resemble Iraha's doppel too. They were inspired to make these wishes because of her actions, so it makes sense they'd reflect that inspiration in their own doppels as well. Also, both of the girls' doppels have half circle shapes adorning their backs. Putting them together makes a golden ring, and Iraha's name literally means ring. It's like the law of cycles after all. Now, time for the more confusing bits. I'll narrow it down to a few key features and tell you what I theorize their meaning behind them all are. First, the clock. Inside that middle head, you can see a pendulum. I think it's alluding to their limited amount of time. The girls were all terminally ill, so the clock might symbolize the idea that they know they don't have much time left. Second, the tongues, or at least I think they're tongues, these swirly doodads coming out of the eyes. I think it's alluding to the rumors, word of mouth. You need the tongue to speak and spread the rumors. Last, the eyes. I think this is because Nemu was the only one who saw what really happened that day.
It's not a real one. It's an artificial witch created from our combined powers.
No, it's not. What are you talking about?
So, despite the girls' best efforts, their wishes ended in a failure. It was all just too much for Ui to handle, and the way it all worked out, Nemu was the only one who remembers Ui existed before she was wiped out of reality. She saw the truth with her own eyes. Maybe the tongues and the eyes isn't just about spreading rumors, maybe it's also about telling lies, keeping up the facade that she doesn't remember who Ui is. Anyways, let's tackle little Ui herself.
I wish for the power to collect! We're stealing it from you! Kyubey!
Ui wished to harvest, so she could take the darkness that turns soul gems black and instead purify them so they don't become witches. However, there was just too much for her to handle, so the darkness of her own soul gem couldn't contain it. So, as a last resort to separate her soul from the witch she almost instantly turned into, they stored her soul in the withered body of the Kyubey they stole their powers from. And yes, Ui is the little Kyubey who hangs out with Iraha. Okay, so there's kind of a lot to cover with Ui, specifically her various different witch forms. We'll start with her doppel, which is noticeably different from Nemu, Toka, and Iraha. This one has her chained to a pillar, and if you pay attention, this top piece is actually a moth, or at least has moth-like wings. This piece, however, kind of looks like a weird head though, not a moth's head. Instead, it kind of looks like Ui's head, but as if her face was pointed down, maybe in shame, disappointment that their plan has failed, or waiting for punishment. And that punishment angle works a lot because the doppel can't actually do anything. All it can do is stand there and take damage, reverting that damage it takes into gemstones. Ui's wish also made her immobilized, and while some of the pain she experienced did purify some soul gems, ultimately she was unable to stop the damage being dealt to her. But let's take a closer look at her witch form, Shitori Igumo. It's still got that pillar it's resting on, but that depressed girl's head has become fully moth-like. Rather than the cape, it has real wings, and it's traded its sword and shield for an altar. Truly biblical in a way, right? Shitori also has a fully powered up form where it breaks free from the chains that binds it, finally able to roam and find the girl who's special to it. Whether this means Iraha, Ui's sister, or Ui is looking for herself, lost to reality, I think is up for interpretation. By the way, the name Shitori Igumo seems to be a direct reference to a poem, written by the same author of the Galactic Railroad. In that poem, it talks about a girl and her dying sister. There's a link to the full translated poem in the description if you want to see the whole thing. I'm not done with the witch form just yet, because we need to pay attention to her familiars, named Oscar. If you played Magia Record back in the day, you probably remember hating these guys because they were everywhere. So why are they birds? And why are they called Oscar? Well, this is exciting. Remember the fact Toka's doppel was the matchstick girl? This is where it all comes together. Oscar Wilde wrote a story called The Happy Prince. In that story, there is a statue of a prince that has never experienced sadness. I think it's important to point out here that Shitori's nature might be suffering, but it's titled The Happy Witch. The statue of the prince asks a swallow to take the gems off its body and give them to those who need them. And remember, Shitori harvested pain and turned them into gems. Given the crown, royal gear, and cape, clearly Ui here is the prince, or in this case, the princess. The swallow gives 3 gems to noteworthy people in the story. These people are clearly represented with Iraha, Toka, and Nemu. First, a mother caring for her sick child. Obviously, this is referencing Iraha. She literally became a magical girl to help the sickly Ui. Second, a playwright. Remember, Nemu was a literary genius. And third, a girl selling matchsticks, just like Toka's doppel. That is why Ui's doppel doesn't look like the other 3's. Their doppels are bird-like to represent the swallow in the story, just like her bird-like familiars. Now, why a moth? Well, that's not as obvious, I fear. Moths generally symbolize growth or change. Most things that involve a chrysalis symbolize that. However, moths are also often associated with the living and the dead, your spirit moving on into the afterlife. And these things can generally describe Ui, I suppose, stuck between life and death. Anyways, there's one last one to tackle. This thing, this monstrosity that happened when her soul was pulled out of her half-transformed witch body. This isn't Shitori Igumo. This is called Embryo Eve, a half-witch, not fully formed. Now, to talk about Embryo Eve, we actually need to finally talk about the last girl for today. Finally, the last girl who's a part of the prison aesthetic Toka and Nemu are a part of. See, when the three little geniuses made their wishes, they weren't the only ones in the hospital. Alina Gray was there and had used her powers to help contain the half-born witch and made a deal with the girls to help them get rid of all witches forever. Alina represents the prison warden. Look at her little hat. Such authority. She is often the muscle of their team, the one who's healthy enough and capable enough to go out and do most of the hands-on work for the Wings of Magius. While she might not be one of the genius children, she's still got a brilliant mind in her own right. Alina is an artist, a famous one too, making macabre masterpieces at a very young age, inspired by her fascination with death after her grandfather passed away. After a while though, she became sort of disillusioned with her art and was sick of people pestering her, so when Kyubey came to her, she wished to have an atelier, or in other words, a place no one could bother her. This wish gave her the power to make her cubes, and she uses them to contain various things, mostly people and witches. Alina wants to help Embryo Eve grow to its fullest potential because the girls still think it has the power to fully execute the girls' initial plan of purifying the world of darkness and save everyone from becoming witches. See, the reason people in Kamihama unlock doppels is actually because Alina Gray trapped the whole city in a giant containment cube. It was an attempt to slow down the rapid amounts of darkness that was clearly turning Ui into a witch too quickly. But the girls want all magical girls everywhere to get the ability to use doppels, because that, in essence, should get rid of witches forever. Unfortunately, in order to do that, they need to feed Embryo Eve a ton of power, and that involves the death of magical girls. Kind of like a weird magical girl trolley problem, eh? Alina also has the ability to make her own labyrinths, and she uses this power to trap witches together. They'll ultimately fight until the stronger witch consumes the power of the weaker one, making it even stronger. That's the reason why Kamihama's witches are notoriously much stronger than anywhere else. I want to cover some last few design details before we get into the real meat of Alina's purpose here. First, her name. Her last name being Gray is likely a reference to the story Dorian Gray, a story that's most famous for the painting of its titular character. I would think this is a bit of a stretch, except for two crucial things. First, Dorian Gray is another story by Oscar Wilde, just like The Happy Prince. And second, her doppel's name is Old Dorothy, and Dorothy is the feminized version of the name Dorian. And that's just too perfect to be a coincidence in my mind. I also think that maybe the name Dorothy might be referencing The Wizard of Oz, a story about a girl who fights a witch. It might not be as on the nose, but I think there's something there. So, let's tackle her doppels now, since we're on the topic. Old Dorothy seems to look like a virus of some sort. You might think this had something to do with the fact Alina Gray was also at the hospital when the girls made their wish, but she wasn't actually there for any sickness-related reasons. After Alina became a magical girl, she unfortunately threw herself off a building in an attempt at suicide. However, since magical girls' bodies don't hold their souls, their soul gems do, she lived. I do think her doppel is meant to look like Contagion, specifically because her wish and her ability represents the idea of quarantine. When there's a disease, you lock yourself away to keep it out. The full doppel form even wears a gas mask over its face, not only leaning more into the Contagion concept, but also certain artists use gas masks while using their spray paint, which is a nice extra little fit for Alina's artsy style. Old Dorothy isn't the end of the line for Alina though. At the end of the story, when Toka and Nemu abandon their plan, Alina fuses herself with Embryo Eve, and she becomes Neo Dorothy Motherfucker. Yes, that is actually its name. I love it. There's so much personality in that name. So I understand it looks like a lot at first glance, and it is, but if we pay attention, we can still see the elements from both Old Dorothy and Embryo Eve at play here. The moth wings, only now with a webbing of Alina's Contagion, moth antennae, the little crown, and then, wait a minute, are those horse legs? Wait a minute, do you remember what I said? In the beginning of the video, she and you represent the fourth horseman of the apocalypse, a pale rider on a horse named Death. I mused if we would ever see the other three horsemen represented in other girls. These are white horse legs. The first horseman of the apocalypse rides atop a white horse! And this is perfect because the first horseman represents conquest. Alina wanted Embryo Eve to spread her powers across the world, taking over and changing everything to fit their ways, like on a conquest. She's a prison warden, she's a leader and a warrior, and it all makes perfect sense. Well, except for one little hiccup. I admit, when I was first taking a closer look at Neo Dorothy, I definitely thought these were horse legs, and my brain exploded as I made this Horsemen of the Apocalypse connection. Unfortunately, upon further inspection, these are, in fact, not horse hooves. Horse hooves don't split down the middle like that. These are instead deer hooves. And we even get a much better look at that deer motif when we see Holy Alina. Yeah, the whole deer head kind of gives it away, huh? However, I am still 100% willing to fudge this minor detail a bit and continue to think Alina is the White Horseman of Conquest, because it's just too perfect for me not to accept this into my heart, even if it's just a headcanon. So, why a deer? Well, more specifically, this is a white stag, and there's actually quite a lot of symbolism around the white stag. In Arthurian legend, the white stag was said to be able to always evade being caught. It's awfully hard to catch the warden of a prison, eh? There's quite a few biblical symbolism around the white stag, usually associated with certain saints claiming they have visions of Jesus speaking to them atop a white stag. Alina certainly sees herself as godlike. Why else would she fuse with Embryo Eve, which also had some biblical elements to it in its design, remember? In Celtic mythology, however, the white stag is a symbol of bad tidings, messengers from the afterlife, or something similarly otherworldly, and I think that's the most likely thing, because remember, moths were also symbols of the afterlife. This idea of something being between life and death, the white stag and moths, and it comes together perfectly. And that's all cool and fine, but I am going to personally stick to my Horsemen of the Apocalypse thing. And with that, I think it's time to call it a day here. I've covered the twisted fates of Magia Record's darkest stories and characters, the true villains of their world, and I had an absolute blast. I hope you had fun, and I hope you learned something too. If there's anything you think I missed, or theories you have about the girls of Magia Record, I would love to see them in the comments below. Shout out to my $10 patrons, you're all amazing. Andrew, Valhalla Knight, Chamomile, Classy Critic, Genital War Thunder, Jake, Amber, Hype Man, Isaiah, Scaring Crows, Not All That Evil, Holly, Messiah, Jacob, Ben's Sketchbook, Rain, Trash, Wild Pilot, Josh, Twisty, Juan, Bunkin Duncan, Hoodie Angel, Ranger, Hutmut Butt, Sean, Primaroon, Steve, Overhypen, Plague, Unspoken, Tyrene, Thanos, Pandemonium, Peter, Agiri, Shahid, Eden, The Eliza, Minnie, Liv Lobotomy Sane, Doki Pokey, Fanboy, myself, and Moon of Blues. Yeah, did you have fun? This one was a long time coming, and I knew it was going to be a big one, and I'm so glad I learned so many cool things with this one. That's always the best part. I learn things, and I love learning things, and I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun. Yeah, let me know any theories you have, let me know what other girls you want me to cover with a series like this, and any and all thoughts and opinions. I would love to see them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.